Isaac Beiler, a 47-year-old Amish carpenter from Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, disappeared on October 12, 2018, along with his two nephews, Samuel and Jacob Stoltzfus, ages 19 and 16. The three men left their family farm in the early morning to collect timber from a wooded area approximately 3 miles northwest of their settlement. They were expected to return by late afternoon, but never arrived home. Their disappearance sparked one of the most extensive search operations in the county's recent history, leaving a close-knit community devastated and searching for answers that would not come for 2 years. Isaac Beiler had lived his entire life in Lancaster County, working as a skilled furniture maker and barn builder. According to his wife, Rebecca Beiler, Isaac was known throughout the settlement for his craftsmanship and his dedication to helping younger members of the community learn traditional woodworking techniques. He had no history of leaving without notice and maintained a predictable daily routine centered around his workshop, family responsibilities, and church activities. Rebecca stated in her initial report to authorities that Isaac had been planning the timber collection trip for several days, as he needed specific hardwood for a commissioned dining table he was building for a family in a neighboring district. Samuel Stoltzfus, the older of the two nephews, worked alongside his uncle regularly and had been learning carpentry since he was 14 years old. Family members described Samuel as responsible and hardworking, with plans to eventually establish his own woodworking business within the settlement. His father, Aaron Stoltzfus, told investigators that Samuel had been excited about the trip because Isaac had promised to teach him how to identify the best trees for furniture-grade lumber. Samuel lived with his parents and 4 younger siblings on a dairy farm adjacent to Isaac's property, and the two families maintained daily contact through shared work and meals. Jacob Stoltzfus, Samuel's younger brother, had recently finished his formal education in the Amish one-room schoolhouse and was transitioning into full-time farm work. According to his mother, Martha Stoltzfus, Jacob had asked to join his uncle and brother on the timber expedition because he wanted to spend more time learning skills beyond dairy farming. Martha reported that Jacob left the house at approximately 6:30 in the morning after completing his early chores, which included feeding livestock and cleaning the barn. She stated that he wore his usual work clothes, a dark blue shirt, black trousers, suspenders, and a straw hat, and carried a canvas bag containing lunch prepared by his mother. The Beiler and Stoltzfus families belonged to an old-order Amish community of approximately 250 people spread across several farms in a rural section of Lancaster County. The settlement maintained traditional practices including horse-drawn transportation, no electricity in homes, and limited interaction with modern technology. Community members explained to investigators that their lifestyle emphasized manual labor, self-sufficiency, and strong family bonds. Bishop Eli Lapp, the spiritual leader of the settlement, stated that Isaac Beiler was a respected elder who frequently assisted families with construction projects and served as a mentor to young men learning trades. On the morning of October 12th, Isaac, Samuel, and Jacob departed from the Beiler property, using a horse-drawn wagon loaded with hand saws, axes, rope, and water containers. Rebecca Beiler told police that Isaac had indicated they would be traveling to a forested area that the community had used for decades as a source of timber. The location was accessible by a dirt road that connected to state-maintained forest land. Isaac had visited the site multiple times over the years and was familiar with the terrain. Rebecca stated that her husband expected to return before evening prayers, which typically occurred around 7 o'clock. When the three men failed to return by nightfall, family members initially assumed they had encountered delays such as difficulty locating suitable trees or challenges transporting cut lumber. However, as hours passed and complete darkness settled over the area, concern grew within both families. Aaron Stoltzfus stated that he walked to Isaac's property around 8:30 in the evening and spoke with Rebecca, who confirmed that she had not heard from her husband. The families decided to wait until first light to take action, as traveling through unfamiliar forest areas at night without artificial lighting would be dangerous and unproductive. At dawn on October 13th, a group of approximately 15 men from the settlement organized a search party and traveled by wagon to the forest location Isaac had described to his wife. They followed the dirt road into state forest land and began calling out for the missing men while searching for signs of their presence. Around mid-morning, the search party discovered Isaac's wagon and horse tied to a tree at the edge of a densely wooded section. The wagon contained the tools the men had brought, and there were no obvious signs of disturbance. The discovery location was marked and reported to authorities immediately after the search party returned to the settlement. Lancaster County Sheriff's Department received the missing persons report on the afternoon of October 13th, approximately 32 hours after Isaac, Samuel, and Jacob were last seen. Deputy Sheriff Thomas Crawford, who served as the primary investigator on the case, stated in official reports that the delayed notification was not unusual given the Amish community's preference for handling matters internally before involving outside law enforcement. Deputy Crawford assembled a team that included additional deputies, volunteer search and rescue personnel, and tracking dogs from a regional K-9 unit. The initial official search began on October 14th and focused on the area surrounding the abandoned wagon. Search teams systematically covered sections of forest, looking for footprints, broken branches, discarded items, or any indication of where the three men might have traveled. The terrain consisted of mixed hardwood forest with dense underbrush, rocky outcroppings, and several small streams. Tracking dogs picked up scent trails leading away from the wagon but lost the scent after approximately half a mile, which investigators found unusual given favorable weather conditions. Deputy Crawford noted in his report that the dogs appeared confused and repeatedly circled back to the same area without establishing a clear direction. Family members provided detailed descriptions of the missing men to assist in the search effort. Isaac Beiler was described as 5 feet 10 inches tall, approximately 170 pounds, with brown hair, a full beard graying at the edges, and blue eyes. Samuel Stoltzfus was reported as 6 feet tall, 160 pounds, with sandy brown hair, clean-shaven as was customary for unmarried Amish men, and hazel eyes. Jacob Stoltzfus was 5 feet 8 inches tall, approximately 145 pounds, with dark brown hair, no facial hair, and brown eyes. All three were wearing traditional Amish clothing in dark colors, which family members noted would make them difficult to spot in heavily forested areas. The search expanded over the following days to include aerial surveillance using a county helicopter, which flew grid patterns over the forest, while observers looked for any signs of the men or indications of where they might have traveled. Ground teams increased in size as volunteers from neighboring townships joined the effort, bringing the total number of searchers to over 100 people at peak deployment. Despite the extensive coverage, no additional evidence was located beyond the wagon and the inconclusive scent trails detected by tracking dogs. Community members maintained a constant presence during the search operation, with Amish families providing meals and support to search teams, while also conducting their own parallel efforts using traditional methods. Bishop Lapp organized prayer vigils that drew participants from multiple Amish settlements across the region. According to attendees, the gatherings focused on asking for divine guidance and the safe return of the missing men, while also providing emotional support to the Beiler and Stoltzfus families. Rebecca Beiler and Martha Stoltzfus were described by community members as devastated, but maintaining composure through faith and the support structure provided by their church. As the search entered its second week, investigators expanded their inquiry to consider alternative scenarios. Deputy Crawford interviewed family members, friends, and community leaders to determine whether Isaac, Samuel, or Jacob had expressed any intentions to leave the area or had been experiencing personal difficulties that might explain a voluntary disappearance. All sources uniformly stated that such a scenario was implausible, given the men's strong ties to their families, their religious commitments, and their established roles within the community. Rebecca Beiler emphasized that her husband had never given any indication of unhappiness or desire to leave their life, and Aaron Stoltzfus stated that both of his sons were content with their paths and had no known conflicts or problems. Investigators also examined whether the men might have been victims of foul play, though the lack of physical evidence made this line of inquiry difficult to pursue. Deputy Crawford noted that the remote location and absence of witnesses limited the investigative options. The area where the wagon was found saw minimal traffic, with only occasional hunters or hikers passing through during autumn months. No reports of suspicious individuals or vehicles in the vicinity had been filed in the days surrounding the disappearance. The isolated nature of the forest and the traditional Amish practice of traveling without communication devices meant that reconstructing the men's final hours relied entirely on physical evidence and the limited information provided by family members about their plans. Local media began covering the story during the second week of the search, bringing regional attention to the case. News outlets from Philadelphia and surrounding areas sent reporters to Lancaster County to interview investigators and community members. The coverage generally focused on the unusual nature of the case, the extensive search efforts, and the impact on the Amish community. Bishop Lapp spoke briefly with reporters, requesting privacy for the affected families while expressing gratitude for the support provided by law enforcement and volunteers. He stated that the community remained hopeful, but was prepared to accept whatever outcome was revealed through continued searching and investigation. As October progressed and temperatures began to drop, concerns grew about the men's survival if they were injured or lost in the forest. Search teams emphasized the urgency of locating Isaac, Samuel, and Jacob before winter weather arrived, which would make both survival and search operations significantly more difficult. However, despite rotating fresh teams into the field and maintaining daily search activities, no new leads emerged. The case began to attract attention from missing persons advocacy groups and private search organizations, several of which offered assistance or resources to aid in the investigation. By early November, official search operations were scaled back due to diminishing likelihood of finding the men alive in the forest and the practical limitations of continuing such an intensive effort indefinitely. Deputy Crawford stated in a press briefing that the investigation would remain open and active, but daily ground searches would be suspended unless new information came to light. He encouraged anyone with knowledge about the case or who discovered anything unusual in the forest areas to contact the Sheriff's Department immediately. The decision to reduce search activities was difficult but necessary, given resource constraints and the lack of viable leads to pursue. The Beiler and Stoltzfus families struggled to adjust to life without answers about what happened to their loved ones. Community members rallied around both families, providing practical assistance with farm work, childcare, and daily tasks, while the families processed their grief and uncertainty. Jacob Beiler, who had 4 children ranging in age from 8 to 23, faced the challenge of maintaining the household and Isaac's workshop business without knowing whether her husband would return. Church members organized a support system that ensured the family's financial needs were met through collective assistance, a traditional practice within Amish communities during times of crisis. Aaron and Martha Stoltzfus dealt with the loss of both sons while caring for their 4 remaining children, who ranged in age from 6 to 14. The couple struggled with questions about what might have happened and whether their decision to allow Jacob to accompany his uncle and brother had contributed to the tragedy. Community counseling, provided through pastoral care and family support networks within the settlement, helped the Stoltzfuses navigate their grief while maintaining their responsibilities to their surviving children and their farm operations. Throughout the late autumn and winter months, the case remained in the thoughts of community members, even as daily life necessarily continued. The settlement held regular prayer services specifically focused on the missing men and their families, and church leaders emphasized the importance of maintaining faith during times of incomprehensible loss. Investigators periodically revisited the case files, reviewing evidence and considering alternative theories, but no breakthroughs occurred. The forest where Isaac, Samuel, and Jacob had last been seen became a place that community members generally avoided, though some families reported that hunters and hikers from outside the Amish settlement continued to use the area. As the first anniversary of the disappearance approached in October 2019, media outlets revisited the story, interviewing Deputy Crawford and family members about the year that had passed without resolution. The coverage brought renewed attention to the case but failed to generate new leads or evidence. Jacob Beiler spoke briefly with a reporter, stating that her family continued to hope for answers while trying to move forward with their lives. She emphasized that the support from their community had been essential in managing the ongoing pain of not knowing what happened to Isaac. Aaron Stoltzfus declined to participate in anniversary coverage, with Bishop Lapp explaining that the family wished to grieve privately and maintain focus on their faith rather than public attention. The case file remained open, but essentially dormant as the second year after the disappearance began. Deputy Crawford, who had since retired from the sheriff's department, occasionally reviewed the file during his consulting work on cold cases, but acknowledged that without new physical evidence or witness information, the investigation had reached an impasse. The official position was that Isaac Beiler, Samuel Stoltzfus, and Jacob Stoltzfus had likely encountered a fatal accident in the forest, possibly falling into a hidden ravine, becoming lost and succumbing to exposure, or experiencing some other tragedy that left their remains in an undiscovered location. However, the lack of any bodies or definitive evidence meant that this conclusion remained speculative rather than confirmed. Life in the Lancaster County Amish settlement gradually returned to familiar patterns, though the absence of Isaac, Samuel, and Jacob left permanent marks on their families and community. Rebecca Beiler's oldest son took over management of his father's workshop, learning to complete projects and maintain client relationships that Isaac had established. The Stoltzfus family focused on their dairy operation and the development of their younger children, finding purpose in their daily work while carrying the weight of their unresolved loss. The community maintained its traditions and routines, understanding that life required moving forward, even when questions remained unanswered and grief persisted beneath the surface of daily activities. The morning of October 12, 2018, began as an ordinary day for the families of Isaac Beiler and the Stoltzfus brothers. According to Rebecca Beiler's statement to investigators, her husband woke at his usual time of 5 o'clock and completed morning prayers before heading to the barn to feed the horses and check on livestock. Rebecca prepared breakfast while their 4 children completed their assigned morning chores, a routine that had remained unchanged for years. Isaac ate quickly, she reported, and mentioned that he wanted to reach the timber site early to maximize daylight hours for selecting and cutting trees. He kissed Rebecca goodbye around 6:15 and walked to the barn to prepare the wagon and harness the horse. Martha Stoltzfus told deputies that her sons Samuel and Jacob completed their dairy farm chores before dawn, as was their custom. Samuel milked cows while Jacob cleaned stalls and distributed feed to the livestock. The brothers ate breakfast with their family around 6 o'clock, and Martha packed lunches for both boys consisting of bread, cheese, dried meat, and apples. She stated that Jacob seemed excited about the trip and asked several questions about what types of trees they would be looking for. Samuel remained quiet during breakfast, which Martha indicated was typical of his reserved personality. Both young men left the house together around 6:30 and walked across the adjoining property to meet their uncle at Isaac's barn. Rebecca Beiler was the last family member to see all 3 men together. She stated that she walked to the barn around 6:40 to bring Isaac a container of water for the journey. Samuel and Jacob had already arrived and were helping Isaac load tools onto the wagon. The 3 men were discussing which route to take through the back roads to reach the forest location. Rebecca reported that the conversation was routine and that none of the men expressed any concerns or indicated anything unusual about the planned trip. She watched the wagon pull away from the property, heading northwest on a dirt path that connected to a network of rural roads, used primarily by Amish families in the area. The expected timeline, according to family members, was for Isaac, Samuel, and Jacob to reach the forest by mid-morning, spend several hours identifying and cutting suitable timber, load the wood onto the wagon, and return home by late afternoon or early evening. Isaac had made similar trips dozens of times over his years as a carpenter and was considered highly familiar with both the route and the forest area. The journey to the timber site typically took approximately 90 minutes by horse and wagon, and Isaac had told Rebecca he anticipated needing 3 to 4 hours for the actual work of selecting and processing trees before beginning the return trip. When evening arrived on October 12th and the men had not returned, Rebecca Beiler initially assumed they had encountered minor delays. She told investigators that it was not unprecedented for timber collection to take longer than planned if trees proved difficult to cut or if the horse needed frequent rest periods. However, as the sun set completely and full darkness descended over the settlement, Rebecca's concern intensified. She completed evening chores and fed her children dinner while watching the road for any sign of the wagon's approach. By 7:30, when the family normally gathered for evening prayers, Rebecca decided to walk to the Stoltzfus farm to speak with Aaron and Martha. Aaron Stoltzfus stated that he shared Rebecca's growing worry when she arrived at his home around 8 o'clock. He had expected his sons to return by evening chores and had become concerned when they failed to appear. Aaron explained to deputies that the Amish community generally did not travel after dark due to the dangers of navigating rural roads without artificial lighting and the difficulty horses experienced pulling wagons over uneven terrain in complete darkness. The fact that Isaac, an experienced and cautious man, had not returned before nightfall suggested to Aaron that something had prevented their departure from the forest or their journey home. The two families made the difficult decision to wait until first light before taking action. Aaron Stoltzfus told investigators that attempting a nighttime search would have been dangerous and potentially counterproductive, as searchers could easily become lost or injured in the dark forest. Additionally, the families held on to the possibility that the men had decided to camp in the forest if they had worked later than anticipated or if the horse had suffered an injury that made night travel inadvisable. Martha Stoltzfus stated that she slept very little that night, repeatedly going to the window to look for any sign of her sons returning home. At first light on October 13th, Aaron Stoltzfus gathered 14 men from the settlement to form a search party. The group assembled at Isaac's barn around 6 o'clock in the morning, bringing horses, basic supplies, and tools that might be needed if the missing men were found injured. Bishop Eli Lapp joined the search party and led a brief prayer before the group departed. Rebecca Beiler provided the searchers with detailed information about the route Isaac had planned to take and described the general location of the timber site based on previous conversations with her husband about his preferred harvesting areas. The search party followed the dirt roads northwest from the settlement, moving at a steady pace while calling out the names of the missing men and watching for any signs of the wagon or indications that the men had passed through. According to David Zook, one of the searchers, the group maintained high hopes during the first hour of travel, expecting to encounter the men returning home or to find them dealing with a broken wagon wheel or injured horse. However, as the search party penetrated deeper into the forest area without any sightings, concern began to replace optimism. Around 9:30 in the morning, the search party located Isaac's wagon. Levi Fisher, who was riding at the front of the search group, reported seeing the wagon approximately 40 yards off the main dirt road, in a small clearing at the edge of dense forest. The horse remained hitched to the wagon and was tied to a tree, appearing calm and uninjured. Fisher immediately called out to the other searchers, and the entire group converged on the location. A quick inspection revealed that all of the tools Isaac had brought remained in the wagon, and there were no obvious signs of struggle, blood, or damage to the wagon itself. Aaron Stoltzfus stated that the discovery of the abandoned wagon was deeply troubling because it suggested the men had left the location on foot, which made no sense given their purpose for being there. The tools necessary for cutting and processing timber remained untouched, and there was no evidence that any work had been completed. The lunches Martha had packed for Samuel and Jacob sat in the wagon uneaten, and the water containers Isaac had brought appeared full. Bishop Lapp examined the immediate area around the wagon, while other search party members spread out to look for footprints or broken branches that might indicate which direction the men had traveled. Several members of the search party reported finding what appeared to be footprints leading from the wagon into the forest, but the tracks were difficult to follow due to the rocky terrain and thick leaf cover on the forest floor. The searchers called out repeatedly for Isaac, Samuel, and Jacob while moving cautiously into the wooded area, but received no responses. After approximately 2 hours of searching the immediate vicinity without finding additional clues, Bishop Lapp made the decision to return to the settlement and report the situation to law enforcement authorities. The search party arrived back at the settlement around 1 o'clock in the afternoon on October 13th. Aaron Stoltzfus immediately traveled to the nearest telephone, located at a non-Amish neighbor's property, approximately 2 miles from the settlement, and contacted the Lancaster County Sheriff's Department. He provided dispatch with basic information about the missing men, the location of the abandoned wagon, and the timeline of events. The dispatcher assured Aaron that deputies would be sent to investigate immediately and requested that someone from the community meet law enforcement at a designated road intersection to guide them to the wagon's location. Deputy Sheriff Thomas Crawford arrived at the scene around 3 o'clock that afternoon, accompanied by 2 additional deputies and a county emergency services coordinator. Crawford's initial report documented the wagon's position, the condition of the horse, and the undisturbed state of the tools and supplies. He interviewed members of the Amish search party who had remained at the site, gathering information about the timeline of the discovery and what the searchers had observed. Crawford noted in his report that the absence of any apparent struggle or signs of distress at the wagon site was unusual and made forming initial theories about what had occurred difficult. Law enforcement officials established a perimeter around the wagon and began a systematic search of the surrounding area before darkness fell. Deputies marked several sets of footprints leading into the forest, but, like the Amish searchers before them, found the tracks difficult to follow beyond approximately 100 yards from the wagon. Crawford requested additional resources, including tracking dogs and search and rescue volunteers, to begin comprehensive operations the following morning. He also initiated missing persons reports for Isaac Beiler, Samuel Stoltzfus, and Jacob Stoltzfus, entering their descriptions and last known location into state and federal databases. That evening, the settlement gathered for an emergency prayer service at the community's meeting house. According to attendees, approximately 180 people from the local Amish population attended, along with some non-Amish neighbors who had relationships with the affected families. Bishop Lapp led prayers specifically focused on the safe return of the missing men and provided spiritual support to Rebecca Beiler and the Stoltzfus family. Community members organized themselves into support groups to assist both families with immediate needs, including childcare, meal preparation, and farm work that could not be delayed despite the crisis. The official search operation began in earnest on the morning of October 14th. Deputy Crawford assembled a team of approximately 35 people, including sheriff's deputies, state forest rangers, volunteer search and rescue personnel, and experienced local hunters familiar with the terrain. 2 tracking dogs from a regional K-9 unit arrived at the scene around 8 o'clock. The dogs were given scent articles belonging to the missing men, including clothing items provided by family members, and were released to track from the wagon location. Search coordinator Michael Stevens, who managed the volunteer rescue team, stated in his after-action report that the tracking dogs immediately picked up scent trails leading from the wagon into the dense forest. However, both dogs lost the scent after approximately half a mile and began exhibiting confused behavior, circling repeatedly and failing to establish a clear direction. Stevens noted that this was unusual given the favorable weather conditions, lack of rain since the disappearance, and the relatively short time frame since the men had been in the area. The dog handlers attempted multiple releases from different starting points, but the results remained consistently inconclusive. Ground search teams divided the forest into grid sections and began systematic sweeps of the terrain. Each team consisted of 5 to 7 people moving in coordinated lines, visually scanning for any signs of the missing men, including clothing, footprints, disturbed vegetation, or personal items. The search area encompassed approximately 12 square miles of mixed forest, rocky outcroppings, small streams, and varying elevation changes. Deputy Crawford noted in his reports that the terrain presented significant challenges for both searchers and for anyone who might be lost or injured in the area. Family members maintained a presence at a command post established near the wagon location. Rebecca Beiler, Aaron Stoltzfus, and Martha Stoltzfus rotated through the site, providing information to investigators and waiting for any news from search teams. According to volunteers who interacted with the families, the waiting was extraordinarily difficult, particularly as each search team returned without having found any trace of the missing men. Community members brought food and supplies to the command post and maintained a supportive presence, though the Amish families generally preferred to grieve and wait privately rather than engaging extensively with non-community members. As the search entered its 3rd day on October 15th, the Lancaster County Sheriff's Department requested aerial support from the Pennsylvania State Police Aviation Unit. A helicopter equipped with thermal imaging cameras flew grid patterns over the forest, looking for heat signatures that might indicate human presence. The aerial search covered a broader area than ground teams could effectively sweep, and had the advantage of being able to spot disturbances in the forest canopy or unusual features that might indicate where someone had traveled or taken shelter. However, the thermal imaging detected no human signatures, and visual observation from the air revealed no obvious signs of the missing men. Investigators expanded their inquiry to include interviews with hunters, hikers, and residents who lived near the forest area or who might have been in the vicinity on October 12th. Deputies contacted sporting goods stores, campgrounds, and local businesses to determine whether anyone had reported seeing 3 Amish men or had observed anything unusual in the days surrounding the disappearance. All inquiries produced negative results. The remote location and the specific date falling on a weekday in mid-October meant that very few people had been in the area, and none of those contacted had any information relevant to the case. Deputy Crawford began exploring alternative scenarios as the search continued without success. He conducted detailed interviews with Rebecca Beiler, Aaron and Martha Stoltzfus, and other community members to assess whether the disappearance might be voluntary. All sources firmly rejected this possibility, citing the men's strong family bonds, their religious commitments, and their established lives within the community. Rebecca Beiler told investigators that Isaac had never expressed dissatisfaction with their life, and that their marriage was strong and stable. Aaron Stoltzfus stated that his sons had no reasons to leave, and that their plans for the future were centered entirely within the Amish community. The possibility of foul play was also considered, though the lack of evidence made this theory difficult to substantiate. Crawford's reports noted that the isolated location, the absence of witnesses, and the lack of any signs of struggle or violence at the wagon site provided no clear indications of criminal activity. Background checks on Isaac Beiler, Samuel Stoltzfus, and Jacob Stoltzfus revealed no criminal histories, no known conflicts with individuals, and no circumstances that would suggest they had been targeted. The remote forest location made random criminal encounter unlikely, though investigators acknowledged that such scenarios, while rare, could not be completely ruled out. As the search extended into its second week, media coverage began to increase. Local television stations from Lancaster and Philadelphia sent news crews to the area, filming at the command post and interviewing Deputy Crawford about the investigation's progress. The Amish community generally declined to speak with reporters, maintaining their traditional practice of limiting interaction with outside media. Bishop Lapp issued a brief statement through a community spokesperson, thanking law enforcement and volunteers for their efforts and requesting privacy for the affected families. The statement emphasized that the community was relying on faith and prayer while hoping for the men's safe return. National missing persons organizations reached out to offer assistance as the case gained wider attention. The DOE Network and National Missing and Unidentified Persons System added the 3 men to their databases, distributing their descriptions and case information to law enforcement agencies across the country. Private search groups with specialized equipment and expertise contacted the Sheriff's Department, offering to deploy teams to the area. Deputy Crawford evaluated each offer based on available resources and the practical value different organizations could provide to the search effort. Search operations continued daily through late October, with teams rotating through the forest and periodically revisiting areas that had already been searched. Volunteers from neighboring townships and counties joined the effort on weekends, bringing the total number of searchers to over 100 people during peak deployment periods. Despite the extensive manpower and systematic approach, no additional evidence beyond the abandoned wagon was discovered. The forest seemed to have absorbed Isaac, Samuel, and Jacob without leaving any trace of where they had gone or what had happened to them. Weather conditions began to deteriorate as October progressed into November. Temperatures dropped significantly, and rain showers became more frequent, creating concerns about both the condition of any evidence that might still be in the forest and the survival prospects of the missing men if they were injured or lost. Deputy Crawford acknowledged in a press briefing that the likelihood of finding the men alive diminished with each passing day, particularly as nighttime temperatures began approaching freezing. However, he emphasized that search operations would continue as long as resources permitted and conditions remained safe for search teams. The emotional toll on the Beiler and Stoltzfus families became increasingly evident as weeks passed without answers. Rebecca Beiler struggled to maintain household routines and care for her children, while processing the possibility that her husband might never return. Church members organized a rotation system to ensure someone was always available to assist Rebecca with daily tasks and provide emotional support. Her oldest son, 23-year-old Amish Beiler, attempted to manage his father's workshop and fulfill existing furniture commissions, though he told community members that concentrating on work felt nearly impossible given the circumstances. Aaron and Martha Stoltzfus faced the devastating reality that both of their oldest sons had disappeared simultaneously. Martha reportedly experienced severe emotional distress and required extensive support from family members and the community's informal counseling network. Aaron maintained a stoic demeanor publicly, but privately struggled with questions about whether he should have discouraged Jacob from joining the timber expedition or whether different decisions might have prevented the tragedy. The couple's 4 younger children exhibited signs of trauma and confusion, requiring careful attention from their parents and extended family members, despite the adults' own overwhelming grief. By early November, Deputy Crawford made the difficult decision to scale back active search operations. He explained in an official statement that the investigation would remain open and that deputies would continue following up on any new leads or information that emerged. However, daily ground searches would be suspended due to resource limitations, the approaching winter weather, and the practical reality that months of intensive searching had failed to produce viable clues about the men's whereabouts. Crawford emphasized that the decision was not made lightly and that he remained committed to solving the case if new evidence came to light. The announcement that active searches were being reduced devastated the families and the broader Amish community. While community members understood the practical constraints facing law enforcement, the decision felt like abandonment of Isaac, Samuel, and Jacob when they might still need help. Bishop Lapp organized a community meeting to discuss the situation and to provide spiritual guidance to members struggling with the lack of resolution. He emphasized that faith required trusting in outcomes beyond human understanding, and that the community needed to support the affected families through their ongoing grief, regardless of whether answers ever materialized. As winter settled over Lancaster County, life in the settlement necessarily continued despite the unresolved disappearances. Farms required daily attention, livestock needed care, and children required education and supervision. The community developed a new normal that incorporated the absence of 3 men and the persistent questions about their fate. Prayer services regularly included remembrances of Isaac, Samuel, and Jacob, and their families remained central to the community's collective concern and support efforts. The forest where the men had last been seen took on an ominous quality in community consciousness. While no official restrictions prevented people from entering the area, Amish families generally avoided the location, and parents warned children to stay away from the woods. Some community members reported feeling uncomfortable near the forest and expressed beliefs that something dangerous or unexplainable resided there, though such sentiments were typically shared quietly rather than discussed openly in community settings. 2 years passed with no answers about what happened to Isaac Beiler, Samuel Stoltzfus, and Jacob Stoltzfus. The families learned to function despite the absence of closure, though the pain remained constant beneath daily routines. Rebecca Beiler maintained the household while her oldest son managed the carpentry business. The Stoltzfus family focused on their remaining children and farm operations, finding purpose in work even as questions lingered. The settlement rarely spoke of the disappearance openly, but the loss remained present in every prayer service and community gathering. On November 3, 2020, a group of deer hunters from Reading, Pennsylvania entered the state forest land near where the 3 Amish men had vanished. The hunting party, consisting of 4 experienced outdoorsmen, planned to spend 3 days tracking deer in the remote woodland area. According to their subsequent statements to authorities, the group established a base camp approximately 4 miles from where Isaac's wagon had been found 2 years earlier. On their second day in the forest, the hunters encountered something that disturbed them enough to abandon their trip and contact law enforcement immediately. Mark Henderson, the group's leader, told deputies that while tracking a deer through dense underbrush, the hunters came across a pack of animals exhibiting highly aggressive and unusual behavior. Henderson described the animals as appearing similar to large dogs or possibly coyotes, but their actions seemed coordinated and unnaturally bold. The pack, numbering approximately 7 or 8 individuals, approached the hunters despite obvious human presence and showed no fear when the men made loud noises or attempted to scare them away. James Mitchell, another member of the hunting party, stated that the animals circled the group in what appeared to be deliberate hunting behavior. The hunters fired warning shots into the air, which temporarily dispersed the pack but did not drive them completely away. The animals regrouped at a distance and continued following the hunters as they retreated toward their camp. Mitchell reported that the experience felt threatening in a way that his decades of hunting experience had never prepared him for, describing the animals' behavior as calculated rather than instinctive. During their retreat, the hunters discovered items that appeared to be remnants of human belongings scattered in the underbrush. Robert Carson, the third hunter, told investigators he found torn pieces of dark fabric that resembled Amish clothing, though the material was severely weathered and degraded. Approximately 50 yards from that location, the group discovered what appeared to be a broken wooden tool handle and fragments of leather that might have been part of a boot or bag. The hunters marked the locations using GPS coordinates and photographed the items with their phones before continuing their withdrawal from the area. The hunting party reached their vehicles and immediately drove to the nearest location with cell service to contact authorities. Henderson called the Lancaster County Sheriff's Department and reported both the animal encounter and the discovery of possible evidence related to the missing Amish men. The dispatcher took detailed information and assured Henderson that investigators would respond to the scene. The hunters agreed to meet deputies at a designated location the following morning to guide them to the areas where they had encountered the aggressive animals and found the scattered items. Deputy Maria Santos, who had taken over management of the cold case file after Thomas Crawford's retirement, mobilized a response team that included wildlife officials from the Pennsylvania Game Commission, forensic specialists, and additional deputies trained in evidence collection. The team assembled on November 5th and met with the hunters, who led them back into the forest following the GPS coordinates they had recorded. The journey took approximately 3 hours due to the difficult terrain and the need to move carefully while watching for potentially dangerous animals. At the first location, forensic technicians collected the torn fabric pieces and other degraded materials the hunters had found. Initial examination suggested the fabric was consistent with clothing worn by Amish community members, though definitive identification would require laboratory analysis. The scattered nature of the items and their condition suggested they had been exposed to weather and possibly animal activity for an extended period. Technicians photographed the scene extensively and marked the area for further investigation. Wildlife officials examined tracks and other signs in the surrounding area, confirming the presence of a significant animal population in that section of forest. The tracks appeared to be from large canines, possibly coyotes or feral dogs, though some prints were larger than typical for either species. Officials noted evidence of den sites and kill locations where animals had consumed prey, indicating an established pack with defined territory. The aggressive behavior described by the hunters was consistent with pack animals defending. Chapter 4. Traces and Silence. The discovery of torn fabric and the hunters' encounter prompted authorities to organize a comprehensive search operation in early December 2020. Deputy Santos coordinated a team of 40 personnel, including forensic specialists, wildlife experts, additional law enforcement officers, and volunteers with tracking experience. The Pennsylvania Game Commission deployed officers specifically trained in managing dangerous wildlife situations, and all team members carried deterrent equipment in case of animal encounters. The search focused on a 2-mile radius surrounding the locations where the hunters had found evidence. Teams moved carefully through the terrain, documenting animal tracks, den sites, and any items that might be connected to the missing men. On the second day of operations, searchers located additional fabric remnants and what appeared to be bone fragments in an area heavily marked by animal activity. Forensic technicians collected all materials for laboratory analysis, while wildlife officials examined the site for indicators of what had occurred. Laboratory results confirmed that fabric samples matched clothing consistent with Amish garments from 2018, though definitive connection to the specific missing men could not be established due to degradation. Bone fragments were confirmed as human remains, and DNA testing was initiated to determine identity. Wildlife analysis concluded that a pack of large canines, likely a mix of coyotes and feral dogs, had established territory in the area and exhibited unusually aggressive behavior, possibly linked to rabies exposure or habituation to human presence, through improper waste disposal at illegal campsites found deeper in the forest. In January 2021, DNA results confirmed that bone fragments belonged to Isaac Beiler. Additional searches recovered more scattered remains that were identified through DNA testing as belonging to Samuel and Jacob Stoltzfus. The evidence suggested the three men had been attacked by the animal pack on October 12, 2018. Shortly after leaving their wagon, investigators theorized that the men encountered the pack unexpectedly, and the attack occurred rapidly in terrain that made escape difficult. The animals had dragged remains to various locations throughout their territory, which explained why initial searches had found no trace of the victims. Deputy Santos met with the Beiler and Stoltzfus families in February 2021 to deliver findings. The meetings were conducted privately with Bishop Lapp present to provide support. Rebecca Beiler told authorities that while the news was devastating, having definitive answers allowed the family to begin proper grieving and achieve some measure of closure. Aaron and Martha Stoltzfus expressed similar sentiments, stating that 2 years of uncertainty had been extraordinarily painful, and that knowing what happened, however tragic, was better than endless questions. The Amish community held funeral services in March 2021 after remains were released to families. The services followed traditional practices and drew attendees from multiple settlements across Pennsylvania. Bishop Lapp emphasized in his remarks that while the tragedy was profound, the community's faith provided strength to accept outcomes beyond human control. He noted that Isaac, Samuel, and Jacob would be remembered for their contributions to the community and their devotion to family and faith. Wildlife officials conducted an extensive operation to locate and remove the dangerous animal pack from the forest. Over several weeks, officers trapped or eliminated 11 feral dogs and coyotes exhibiting aggressive behavior or evidence of disease. Testing confirmed that several animals carried rabies, explaining their unusually bold and dangerous conduct. The Game Commission implemented new monitoring protocols for the forest area and increased public education about proper behavior in wildlife habitats. The case was officially closed in April 2021, with conclusions documented in Deputy Santos's final report. The report noted that the tragedy resulted from an unfortunate encounter with diseased wildlife in a remote location where the victims had no means of calling for help or escaping the attack. The isolated nature of the forest and the pack's behavior in scattering remains explained why extensive search operations in 2018 had failed to locate the men. Rebecca Beiler established a small memorial on her property, honoring Isaac's life and work. The Stoltzfus family planted 2 trees near their home in memory of Samuel and Jacob. The settlement returned to regular routines, carrying the memory of the 3 men, while focusing on supporting their families through continued grief and adjustment. The forest remained a place of caution in community consciousness, a reminder of the unpredictable dangers that could exist even in familiar surroundings, and the fragility of life despite faith and careful planning. Range, or more concerning, animals that had lost fear of humans.